So here's my very simple pie crust recipe that I'm going to use for my pumpkin pie, the pie that I'm going to actually be using my own butternut squash that I grew during the summer, but it's like a fake pumpkin pie. It tastes like pumpkin pie. So this is the recipe for the crust. I use 1 cup of flour. You can use all-purpose flour. Half a teaspoon of salt. I'm using pink Himalayan salt, but you can use any kind you want. And for a sweet pie, if you wanted a savory pie, you could leave this part out, but I put a teaspoon of sugar in there. And then just stir it up a little bit, get that mixed up. And then this time I'm using 1 stick or half a cup of cubed butter. I also sometimes use lard that I've rendered myself, or you can buy lard, whatever. It doesn't matter. You can just use any type of fat. I've used coconut oil. Any kind of solid fat is good. Put that in there, and then you just break it up with a pastry cutter. You can use your fingers. It doesn't matter, just as long as you get the amount of dough to butter or flour to butter right. You don't want big chunks of butter in there. You want it to be pretty uniform in size. I like it to feel like a little bit of just a sandy texture where it's mostly cut into the flour. That way you get a nice flaky crust. Let's see. Okay, here's what it looks like when you're done with that. You can also use a food processor to do this. You just want to be careful not to turn it into a dough yet. So you want to just pulse that together. And then after that, I'm going to add 1/4 cup of full-fat sour cream. You don't want to use light sour cream for this. And then just mix it in. Get it all mixed in there with, you can use your hands for this too. I end up using my hands because you're going to have to get it into a ball shape at some point anyway. And if you don't have quite enough moisture from the sour cream, you can also add a tiny bit of water. Use cold water, ice water, something like that that won't melt your butter or your lard or whatever fat you're using. But as you can see, it does, at some point, you're just going to have to get your hands in there to see what you might need for the moisture content. I try to be as light as possible with this. You don't want to make the dough tough by overworking it. But as you can see, it's going to need a little bit of water. Let's take this over to the sink and get myself a little bit. Add it in there, just a little bit at a time. This is cold water, so. And my butter has been in the fridge up until just a few minutes ago, so it was very cold as well. But as you can see, that's pretty much all it needed, just like a teaspoon or 2 of water to be added. Might have to play with it a little bit to get it off your hands. But there we go. Pretty much a ready ball of dough. I'm going to flatten it out a little bit, wrap it in plastic wrap, and stick it in the refrigerator while I get the rest of my ingredients ready. Here we go, all ready to put in the refrigerator. Let's flatten it out. Cover it with the plastic wrap so it doesn't dry out in the fridge. And it's ready to just wait for the pie filling. Well, you have to roll it out first, but to put in the pie plate. But after that, it's ready to go. Okay, so for the pumpkin pie filling, I always put my eggs in the bowl first because we have our own chickens and sometimes there's a little surprise in the egg that you don't want in the rest of your uh, mix. So I crack each egg separately and then put it in the bowl so that I can make sure they're good for what I want them for. And then I have this pumpkin pie filling, which is actually butternut squash that I grew last year. That I roasted the butternut squash, and then I pureed it and put it in a vacuum seal bag at the amount that I need for the pie, which is about 2 cups. And that way, all I have to do is take one out and thaw it, and I'm good to go. Then stir that in a little bit with the egg mixture. And this recipe calls for 3/4 of a cup of sugar. I'm only using half a cup because this honey nut squash is so sweet on its own that 3/4 of a cup is just too sweet for our taste. But if you're using pumpkin pie filling, like the canned pumpkin or something, you could totally go with 3/4 of a cup and it would be just fine. This recipe also calls for a half of a teaspoon of salt for the filling. I'm using pink Himalayan salt for this as well, but you can use any type, obviously, of salt that you want. And it calls for 1/4 of a teaspoon of cloves, ground cloves, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, ground cinnamon, obviously. So there's that. And the original recipe did not call for nutmeg, but I enjoy the taste of nutmeg to the point that I will add it to things like this. So I'm just grinding a little bit of this whole nutmeg. It doesn't take much. I just really like the flavor. So that's it for the spices, except for the ginger. Sorry. It also calls for half a teaspoon of ginger. So do that, of ground ginger. So there's that. And just mix it all up. And then you add 12 ounces of evaporated milk. This recipe is so simple, and usually it's made with things you have on hand. Now I'm going to switch to a different whisk because this one doesn't work that well for incorporating the milk. I'm going to use one like this. And this is basically it. You only need those ingredients, and the filling is ready to go. And here we are back with the pie crust. I just took it out of the refrigerator, and I'm going to put a little bit of flour on this board to roll it out on. I tend to put it through a sieve or something, a sifter, because I don't like lumps of flour on my board when I'm rolling out the dough. So, it's not a necessary step. That's just how I do it. And then put my dough on here. I tend to just push it out a little bit in place, like just kind of bring it to as round of a circle as I can. Doesn't matter that much. You're going to be rolling it to larger than your pie plate anyway. So, and you don't want it to get too warm while you're rolling it out. But that's just about right there. And then I'm just going to push it out from the inside out to the outer edge in all directions. You want it to be, it depends, I guess, on how thick you like your pie crust. It doesn't have to be anything, I like it to be fairly thin, just so it's not doughy or chewy, but that's just my preference. Be back in a few minutes when it's ready to put in the plate. And so here we are with it rolled out. And if it sticks at all, let's see. No, if it sticks at all, you can use a pastry cutter or something to kind of loosen it without tearing it. That's helpful. What I typically do is just pull it over on itself in half like that. And then I put the pie plate up here and I set it about halfway and then just fold it back open. And as you can see, there's plenty of pie crust here to work with. And typically what I do is I'll take a butter knife and I just go, and if you want to have a really fancy fluted edge, you can. I just typically cut around the outer edge of the pie plate. And I will take this extra dough and make, I don't know, snickerdoodles or some type of little cookie with it or something. It doesn't go to waste. And that's if I'm not having a top crust. If you have a top crust, you can roll it back out and use it. But it might be a little tough to do. I mean, it might make it a little tough. So I will use that at a different time. And then I just roll the edges under like this to make it smooth. Okay, so after your pie crust is ready, I just go around the bottom of the pie crust and with a fork and poke a few little holes in there, just so you don't get any bubbles. You don't have to do this, especially when you're baking the crust with a filling in it. I just typically do it. So it's ready to go. I'm going to put the filling in here. You're going to bake this. In the beginning, you preheat your oven to 425 degrees and bake it for 15 minutes, and then lower the temperature to 350 degrees and bake it for an additional 40 to 50 minutes until the center has set. Okay, so here's the finished product, and as you can see here, this is what happens when you are stingy with the crust and overly generous with the filling. It slid out just a little bit, which is okay, but it didn't have to be that way. So let's see what it looks like. It's been cooling for a couple of hours, so just to let the filling set up a little bit. And there we go. That looks like it set up very well, and we'll give it a quick taste here. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad I didn't put more sugar in it. That turned out really well.